Hi guys, welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm talking about the 16 books that I read in February. I'm just going to give you a brief summary on each of the books, what I rated it, and if I would read this author again. I will leave all the timestamps down below if you want to skip to a certain review. This month, I did have 2 5-star reads, which is really great for me. And then I had a lot of like kind of mediocre reads as well, but that's just part of it. You go into a book blind and you really don't know what you're gonna get. So starting off with the first book that I read is a nonfiction memoir. So I actually don't rate nonfiction memoirs on a 5-star scale. I would just say like recommend or not recommend. And I would definitely recommend this book if you are interested in the subject matter. This is Counting the Cost by Jill Duggar. If you do not know who Jill Duggar is, her and her family starred on a TLC show called 19 Kids and Counting, and they come from a very religious background. Their parents do not believe in traditional contraceptives, and they believe that having multiple kids is actually like a great sign to God that you're a big believer. So Jill is one of 19 kids. She is one of the older kids in the Duggar clan. I believe she is kid number 3 or 4. I can't exactly remember. And Jill is now an adult. She's married. She has children of her own. Jill talks about her family before the TLC cameras came in and then after, and how being on a reality show really changed the dynamics in her family. And I think Jill did a really tactful, tasteful job of talking about how she grew up, her religion, her parents, in a very true and vulnerable way without being derogatory towards them, without exposing too intimate, too personal of details. She didn't drag them in the mud, but she did point out some of their flaws. She did point out how she doesn't believe certain things anymore and how she does kind of wish that maybe she grew up differently than she did. She talks about how TLC changed their lives in some ways for the better, but mostly in negative ways. So if you are interested in the Duggar lore, this is definitely going to be for you. It's not a super like deep dive into it. You're not going to get all of the piping hot tea because I think Jill is just too sweet and respectful towards her family still. You know, that's her family. She's not going to give everything, air all of their dirty laundry, but she is willing to give us some of it, and I think that was very brave of her because if you read her book, you will understand the family dynamics and speaking out against the church, against Jim Bob, her dad. It's just very unheard of. So definitely recommend if you are interested at all in the Duggars. I had never really watched 19 Kids and Counting, but I knew a little bit about them and I still found it pretty fascinating. Plus this book is only about 200 pages, so it is a very fast read. The next book that I read is actually one that I listened to on audiobook. This is another nonfiction book. This is a true crime story. I did go ahead and rate this one. I think true crime is a little bit different than memoir, so I do, in my opinion, find it rateable. So I did give this 3.5 out of 5 stars. The book is called I'll Be Gone in the Dark, and it is a woman's obsessive search for the Golden State Killer. This is written by Michelle McNamara, and if you guys don't know who Michelle is, she is very much so into true crime. She had her own true crime blog, and then coincidentally she was also married to Patton Oswalt from King of Queens. He also does the voice of Ratatouille, and unfortunately Michelle tragically passed before this book was published, so they were having to put all of her notes together, and I think this really could have been a 5-star read if Michelle was still alive whenever it was put together and published, but because they were trying to piece everything together without Michelle and they were just going off of her notes, which she herself in the book calls very sporadic. She even talks about how she's taking notes on the Golden State Killer in her daughter's nursery in Crown. I think that it didn't quite come together. It at times just did like a weird time jump, and I just found myself in certain places like confused or disconnected. Now, unfortunately, Michelle was not alive when they actually did end up doing the genealogical test and discovering who the Golden State Killer is, but they do talk about that a little bit in the epilogue. And something I found really disheartening in this book is that the California State Police don't give Michelle any credit for bringing the Golden State Killer to light. Although she didn't solve the murder, she didn't solve the case, she's the one who actually ended up naming the Golden State Killer. She helped to link all of these different killings across California, and she made him more prolific and brought him to attention and really made it urgent for the Golden State Killer to be found. So I definitely think that she should have gotten some credit. Another thing is, having listened to this on the audiobook, it was just absolutely heartbreaking to hear Patton Oswalt talk about Michelle at the end after she had passed. So keep that in mind. But if you are into true crime, you find it interesting, I think this is definitely something worth listening to. I would definitely recommend this on audiobook as opposed to just reading it yourself, because it is in some places kind of dry. But I definitely do think it is worth listening to if you like true crime. Just know that it is kind of a sporadic timeline, and I think where the story really shined is Michelle also wove in her own personal narrative and why she is interested in true crime, and her writing's very good in those sections. Moving on to finally some fiction. This is the book that my book club and I read this month. This is called The Love Scribe. This is by Amy Meyerson, and this is magical realism. I did not like this book. No one in my book club liked this book, and I ended up giving it a 1.5 out of 5 stars. This follows our main character, Alice. Alice discovers one day that she is a love scribe, aka anytime she writes these very pedestrian, obnoxious metaphors about falling in love and then gives the story to someone to read, they instantly meet someone and they fall in love. And Alice doesn't really know where these powers come from. She doesn't know if these powers are a blessing or a curse, but more and more people are soliciting her to write them a love story because they, of course, believe in the Lord. They want to fall in love. Who doesn't? And as Alice continues this journey as a love scribe, she unlocks some secrets about what the stories are actually doing. She meets another character named Madeline, who has a mysterious past and is trying to get over a love. And this book just was odd. It really fell flat. It never really answered any questions about where her powers came from. And also something that my book club and we had a really hard time processing was Alice's relationship with Madeline. I can't say too much other than we were having trouble connecting the dots there. I don't want to give away a spoiler, but none of us had any conclusive answers of what happened there. So we were all very confused about that. And I also found every single character pretty much to be very unlikable. For example, Alice's best friend, Gabby, is supposed to be this like uber confident, uber outgoing person, in contrast to Alice, who is kind of like socially awkward, a little bit more shy and introverted. And the way that Gabby tries to encourage Alice to come out of her shell is just very obnoxious. And as someone who is an introvert, I would not have liked the way that Gabby was going about it. And this is supposed to have been Allison's best friend since like elementary school. So I just feel like Gabby should have embraced Alice as she was. And then the main love interest for Alice in the story was just such a pick-me creep. I did not like him at all. The only thing I really did like in the story is that it did show a little bit of representation between Alice and Duncan, the guy that she liked. And that Alice is a tall girl and Duncan was a little bit shorter than her, and Alice was totally okay with that, because I think a lot of the times we do get really hung up on height standards in our society, and we think that women need to be shorter than men, and that's just not true. So that is the one positive I can say about this book, but overall definitely a skip. The next book that I read was literary fiction. This is The Borrower by Rebecca Makkai. This was Rebecca Mackai's debut novel, and this is a very odd story. I ended up giving this 3 out of 5 stars, but that's more because I really enjoy Rebecca Mackai's writing, and I thought the plot had a lot of potential, but it just didn't all come together for me. So this follows Lucy. Lucy is in her mid-20s, and she's just kind of figuring everything out after she graduated from college. Lucy ends up taking a job in a very small town as a children's librarian, and as Lucy gets really comfortable in this job, she becomes close with a little boy named Ian. Ian has very conservative, very restrictive parents. They are super monitoring and restricting what Ian is allowed to read from the library. They don't let him read pretty much anything. They're one of those parents that like would not let you read Harry Potter because there's magic there. And basically everyone's picking up that Ian, although he is 10 years old, he seems like a little flamboyant, and that his parents will not be accepting of that. So when Lucy catches wind that Ian is having to go to these basically like gay reversal meetings with a pastor. She is just like outraged. She is so upset. She's encouraging Ian to be himself without trying to overstep lines. And what ends up happening is Ian runs away. Ian's a very precocious 10-year-old. He definitely would be like gifted and talented. And Ian ends up running away and hiding in the library. So when Lucy discovers him in the library one morning, Lucy intends to take him back home, but she feels this anger and this guilt towards taking him home, where it's such a toxic environment that they end up running away together. And Lucy gets further and further away from the town. She doesn't know quite how to like make amends and go back on this, because she's like, oh my gosh, did I just kidnap this child unintentionally? And so they end up crossing state lines, and it becomes this very long-winded journey. And you learn more about Lucy and her background and just kind of Ian's naivety to everything going on around him. And it was a very odd read. I didn't really know what to make of it. I really do enjoy Rebecca Mackay's writing. I think she's very good at developing characters. Lucy had a very distinctive voice. Ian was a very well-rounded child in that I didn't think he was just like a super brain. He had other aspects to his personality as well. But something just did not come together on this. I think that the adventure lasted way too long, and it was just kind of an odd plot. She also did this really weird caricature of Russian people that I didn't really particularly enjoy. So I definitely would read another Rebecca Mackay story. I also liked I Have Some Questions for You, which I read last summer. But something about her plots, they just drag on too long, is what I've noticed in both of the books that I've read by her. But I'm definitely still willing to give her a try. Next up, we have an audiobook listen. This was Thank You for Listening by Julia Whelan. And I gave this 2 out of 5 stars. The more I listened to this, the less I enjoyed it. So if you guys are unfamiliar with Julia Whelan does a lot of popular audiobooks. She is the audiobook narrator. She's written a few other fictional books, but I think this was the first and only one that she's ever written that focuses on the protagonist being an audiobook narrator. So our protagonist's name is Swanee. All we really know about Swanee is that she used to narrate romance stories, and now she really narrates more so like contemporary stories and westerns, and that Swanee has had a tragic accident that has left her visually impaired. She's now missing an eye and has to wear an eye patch, but we don't know what happened in that accident. Swanee was an aspiring actress before the accident happened. She's still best friends with a woman who is on the trajectory to become like the next big Oscar winner, and we kind of watch Swanee battle between her insecurities because she does have this eye patch, and you know, her friend is living out their dream. She's happy for her friend, but of course she has like that sinking feeling in her gut that this should be her as well. Now, meanwhile, while all this is going on, Swanee is also dealing with her beloved grandma. Her beloved grandma, Blah Blah, is in a care facility, and Blah Blah is losing her memory due to dementia and in need of money to take care of Blah Blah. Swanee ends up taking a job dual narrating a romance book, even though she says she's over narrating romance books, and she's dual narrating it with Barack McKnight, who is like the big thing in romance book narration. No one knows who he is. Swanee doesn't know who he is. They're just corresponding through emails, and their emails get like pretty flirty, and then eventually Swanee does find out who he is, and there's this twist, and I just found Swanee to be so insufferable. She just kept blaming everyone else for everything. I felt like there was no winning with Swanee ever. It just seemed like there was too much going on as well. I just found the whole story very contrived. Like I said, I listened to this on audiobook, which of course Julia Whelan does narrate herself, and it seemed like Julia Whelan, she put in some characters just to show off her different voice techniques and her, just basically to flaunt her skills, and they didn't really have like a true relevance to the plot, and I just found myself getting like really frustrated with it. Like, don't get me wrong, Julia Whelan is an incredibly talented audiobook narrator. She can do some incredible voices, but I just really didn't like this book, and I was super ready for it to be over. The next book that I read is Holly by Stephen King, and I was gravely disappointed by this book. I only ended up giving it 2 out of 5 stars. So I have read all of the Bill Hodge trilogy, which is where Holly's character originated from, and I enjoyed the Bill Hodge trilogy for what it was. It was like a solid 3-star series. It wasn't incredible, but there was definitely endearing characters. I found the stories enticing enough. So I was interested to see what Holly could do on her own. And a lot of people have issues with Holly because Stephen King used this book as a way to get his liberal agenda across, a way to talk about COVID and how he thinks you should get the vaccine and wear a mask. And that didn't bother me. To each their own, totally fine. I got all my COVID vaccines. I wore a mask whenever we were doing that. But what was very annoying was in every single interaction that Holly met anyone anywhere, she'd be like, have you been vaccinated? Oh, I have to put on my mask. And it was just constant. It was so much so that I feel like at least 100 pages were like devoted to that. It is just boring. It's tiresome. I got that it was happening post-COVID, like 2021-ish. But it just was very boring. And I just found this whole thing way too slow paced. I have never been a super big Holly fan. Stephen King really loves Holly. He thinks that she's very like quirky and endearing, and I have always been pretty much like indifferent to Holly. I was always more of a Bill Hodges fan. I always thought he was the star. And even Jerome and Barbara, I thought they were great as well. And Holly, I've just always been kind of like, she's okay. I really hate that she always says poopy. And so this one just, it wasn't good in my opinion. Honestly, I think the only reason why I ended up giving it 2 stars is because I had grown attached to the characters that were in it, like Jerome and Barbara. And so they got the 2 stars. But honestly, if I had read this as a standalone, I think it would have been a 1-star read for me. The next book that I read was a YA romance. This is Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter. I've heard so much about this book, and it was super okay. I give this 3 out of 5 stars. I did read this in one day. If you're just looking for a quick read to say that you read something, this is it. Like I said, it's a YA romance, so it is definitely targeted to a demographic that is younger than myself. I maybe would have liked this a little bit more if I was younger. So this story follows Liz. Liz is a senior in high school, and she is obsessed with cutesy romance movies, like think John Hughes. And part of the reason why Liz is so obsessed with these movies is because it was something that her and her mom used to do together, is watch those movies, and her mom has now passed. Liz now lives with her dad and her stepmom, and Liz is just very eccentric. She's definitely a I'm not like other girls girl. And one day Liz finds out that her former neighbor Michael has moved back, and Liz is so excited because she had the biggest crush on Michael. And Liz gets together with her current neighbor, who she cannot stand, named Wes, in an attempt to make Michael see her and be jealous that she's with Wes. And it's basically just like an ill-conceived plan. Nothing about it really makes all that much sense. So Wes and Liz are doing like a fake dating type of thing. And of course, while they're fake dating, Liz realizes that Wes isn't all that bad. And you know where it's heading, etc. And like I said, it was perfectly fine. There were definitely some endearing moments, some scenes I thought were like very cutesy, but I think my biggest problem in this was just Liz herself. I just found her to be very insufferable, and I don't know why authors do this to their female leads. I think it's in an attempt to make them so unique and to give them personality. Is that what they end up doing is they end up making these characters just annoying. It makes me think of like if he had been with me, Autumn, in that book with her bows and it was her tiaras. Like, she was so annoying. She had to always mention her tiara and how she was different than everyone else. And I think Liz suffered from that same like, look at me fate, that it just, come on guys, I just want to read about like a normal girl. Like, I think of like Sarah Dessen, like the wallflower type of girl. Her female leads never really bother me. Or I think of, you know, Lara Jean Covey from All the Boys I Loved Before. She was a normal girl. Like, you don't have to take your female leads to this point where you try and give them a personality, and in doing so you just make them very immature and very unlikable. And I think that's just what happened here. So I think if Liz was a little bit more likable, and if the Michael plot just made a little bit more sense, like it never really panned out to me why he just moved back at the end of senior year. They kind of talk about it, but it just was a dumb plot device. Then I think maybe this could have been more of like a 4-star read, but it definitely was like a 2.75, 3-star read. I rounded up to 3. Next up, we have another celebrity memoir. I did listen to this on audiobook. This is Pageboy by Elliot Page. And I would recommend this if you have any sort of interest in Elliot Page's life and transition. I thought that Elliot Page was very raw and vulnerable about how Hollywood treated him as he came out as a lesbian first and then transitioned to transgender. But I will say that the story was told very sporadically. It did a lot of time jumps and it's not linearly told, and so in that aspect it was kind of like disjointed. I saw a lot of people put that on their Goodreads review as well. So although I thought that it was very brave of Elliot to tell his story, I did find that to be a little bit distracting, but it's definitely still a powerful story. The next book that I read is literary fiction. This is The Winners and it is the third in the Beartown trilogy. This is by Fredrik Backman, and I have a lot of feelings about this book. I did end up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. So I read Beartown, I think in November of last year, and it was probably my favorite read of 2023. I just thought it was absolutely beautiful. I was telling my friends in book club about Beartown the other day and trying to encourage them to read it, and I kind of stuck my foot in my mouth because I was like, well, in Beartown you have to wait until page 150 for something like big to happen. The rest is just developing. And they're like, yeah, I don't know, Maddie, if I'm gonna wait until page 150 for something to happen. And I was like, no, trust me. Like Beartown to me, like it was so worth the investment, the first one. Then I read the second one and I didn't really love the second one. It got like weirdly political, but I did want to finish out the Beartown trilogy. So this was the last one, The Winners, and I enjoyed it. It, like I said, 4-star read because I just love these characters so much. Something really tragic does happen at the end and you know it's gonna happen throughout the entire book, and that really broke my heart. Like many tears were shed. I guess what my problem is, and I've seen this debate as well, is I do think that Beartown probably should have just been a standalone novel. I don't think that the rest of it was all that necessary, because what Fredrik Backman does in all of his books, and I actually listened to an interview with him and he says he does this intentionally, is he lets you know at the end of all of the books where the characters are going, where they end up. He gives you a sneak preview so you know more or less what happens to these characters at the end of Beartown. There's obviously like gaps and details to be filled, and so I do think it would have been more powerful as a standalone, but since he did continue to write it and I did grow very attached to these characters, I did end up giving The Winners 4 out of 5 stars, but conflicting feelings there. The next book that I read was a children's book, and this was fantasy. This is The Search for WondLa. This is by Tony DiTerlizzi. I hope I said that right. He is the co-author of the Spiderwick Chronicles, which I read when I was a kid. And when I was a children's librarian, this cover always caught my attention, so I knew I wanted to read it, and I finally did. This follows a girl named Eva 9, and Eva 9 is the only human on her planet that she knows of. She lives with a robot named Mother. They've always lived in this like underground cave, and Mother is very protective of Eva. She's trying to train Eva to go out in the world on her own, but it's very, very overbearing. Mother, the robot, is a helicopter parent. But Eva struggles with this. She wants to feel like she belongs somewhere, and then finally one day there's an attack on their underground cave, and Mother instructs Eva to go out into the world and seek help, and then Eva encounters some other characters along the way. And I guess my biggest problem with this, and yes, I know it's a children's book, is the stakes were never that high. Like Eva would find herself in trouble, and then like 2 pages later someone would rescue her. And so I just didn't really care about what was going on. Again, maybe if I was younger I would have liked this more, but at the same time, like if it's a good book, I feel like it should appeal to all ages. Like Percy Jackson, I love Percy Jackson, and I am 29 years old, and I like it just as much, if not more, than when I read it originally when I was like 12. So I don't know, I wouldn't read the second in the series. I just think it was lacking something, but the illustrations were really phenomenal. Next up, we have a reread. I did listen to this on audiobook, and I zoomed through this because I love this book so much. I read this originally when it came out, and to re-listen to it, it just reignited my love for this book. This is Big Little Lies by Liane Moriarty, and this is a 5 out of 5 read for me. It follows a group of mothers whose children are entering kindergarten, It's basically a bunch of like nosy room moms, and in particular, one of the moms is new to the town. Her name is Jane, and Jane is a young mom. She has a 5-year-old boy named Ziggy, and Jane, I believe, is 24, so definitely younger than the other moms. So already she feels kind of out of place. She's new to the town. Everyone's judging her for being so young, and on the first day of kindergarten orientation, a little girl accuses Ziggy of choking her. And Jane is adamant that Ziggy didn't do this. Ziggy is adamant that he did not do this to this little girl. But in the back of Jane's mind, she wonders if maybe Ziggy did do this, because there is a backstory with Ziggy's father. So we learn that. We also learn that in the future, someone at a school event has been murdered. So you're trying to figure out who murdered this person as well. The way that all of the narrations come together and they weave together, like, you know what's gonna happen. Don't get me wrong, there is some predictability to it, but it's just so expertly done. I just really enjoyed this. I think Madeline is one of my favorite characters ever. She's just hysterical. So 5 out of 5 for me. Okay, going from one of my favorite reads of the month to my absolute least favorite read of the month. My least favorite read this month was a romantasy, and that is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. I did not enjoy this story at all. This was a 1 out of 5 stars for me. So this follows our two characters, is Iris and Roman. Iris is a poor girl. She lives at home with her mom and her brother. Her brother goes off to go fight in a war, and Iris is left with her mom, who is an alcoholic. Iris is vying for a writing internship, and she's going up against a very wealthy, pretentious, hubris boy named Roman, hence why they're rivals. Roman seems like he's the obvious shoo-in, but Iris has the potential and the raw talent, so it kind of goes over that for a little bit. And then while all this is going on, Iris is using her typewriter to write to her brother, and anytime she writes a letter to her brother, she sticks it in the closet, because that's what her grandma, who originally owned the typewriter, always did. And then one day she gets a response back through the closet, and it's like, hey, I'm not your brother. But it doesn't say who the person writing her back is. Now, they do narration where you know instantly it's Roman that's writing her back. And Roman has this like creeping crush on Iris. Iris doesn't know it's Roman. They have this like weird thing where they keep sending these letters back and forth, and we're supposed to believe that they're falling in love through this, but there's really no chemistry. And then eventually what ends up happening is something happens in Iris's familial life. Iris then makes a pivot. She no longer wants the internship that she's competing with Roman about, even though they're rivals. And Iris ends up going on the front lines of this war. She's trying to find her brother, and Roman ends up following her. And I just felt like this was so boring. They were not ever really rivals either. I didn't believe in the fantasy world. It was so underdeveloped. It was just bad. I did not like this. Another book I really did not like was What Have We Done by Alex Finlay. This is a thriller, and I have read Alex Finlay's other 2 books, and I actually really enjoyed them. I think I ended up giving both of them 4 out of 5 stars, but this one was a 1 out of 5 star. This was just a mess. This follows 3 perspectives. Basically, these 3 people, they knew each other in the past at a foster home. At this foster home, all you know is that something bad happened. They conspired together to do something horrible. And now they're adults in their present day life, and they all kind of have like some different notoriety in society. So the female character, Jenna, you learn that she has this very unique past. She's now married to a very wealthy man. She's a stepmom to 2 girls, and she's living like a very suburban mom lifestyle. And there is Nico, who is a producer on a reality TV show about minors. And by minors, I mean like digging tunnels minors, not like underage people. And Nico is like really good looking. He really likes his job, but he has abandonment issues. And then there is Donnie, who was a famous guitarist in a metal band, but is kind of like now a washed up has-been, especially because he is an addict. So it's all three of their perspectives, which are not initially interwoven, besides that they have a past together from their foster home days, and someone is seeking them out and trying to kill them because of what they did in the past. And then they have to kind of connect the dots without actually meeting up for a long time and figuring all that out, and you find out what happened in their past. And I just found this to be very predictable and just bad. It was just poorly written, it was poorly executed, and I didn't feel for any of the characters. Okay, next up, this is my favorite read of the year thus far. I know we're only 2 months in, but I think this is a strong contender of my favorite read of the year. This is The Bee Sting by Paul Murray, and I love this. This is 600 pages of just wow, like amazement, pure bliss. So if you do not like character-driven stories, do not read this. You will not like this. This is a very slow story that follows a family, and I just thought it was phenomenal. So it starts off, it follows the daughter who is a senior. Her name is Cass, and she's really coming into her own. She's best friends with a girl named Elaine, and she's trying to emulate Elaine and her coolness, and it's just kind of about like fitting in and basic teenage stuff like drinking, partying, just finding her place in the world before she goes off to college. Cass comes from a very well-off family, but while all this is going down and she's kind of rebelling, Cass's father's car shop is going under, and Cass is having to deal with like the backlash of the town. And you just watch Cass kind of like spiral from that. Plus Cass ends up finding out a secret about her parents' past. And then it transitions to Cass's little brother, PJ. PJ is just such a people pleaser. You just want to jump through the pages and give PJ a hug. And PJ knows that his family is struggling financially, and he is doing everything that he can, including wearing too small of shoes and making his feet bleed just to keep harmony and keep peace. And I loved PJ. I felt like he is the character that you hear the least from, but like the one that I just, my bleeding heart for him. Then you have the mom, Imelda, and it's really interesting to see Imelda's perspective, because you learn from Cass's perspective that Imelda's kind of this like egotistical, narcissistic housewife, and then learning Imelda's backstory, you see that not all things are as they appear. And I did at first really struggle with her narration, because the author during Imelda's narration doesn't use any punctuation. It's just like a run-on sentence. And so that at first was kind of jarring to the eye, but you get why. And then lastly, we have Dickie. Dickie took over his father's car shops. He's supposed to be this like brilliant businessman, but Dickie's been hiding this secret his entire life. And you learn what happens over decades, and it's a story like no other. One thing I will say is initially I was really frustrated with the ending. Like I had to like take a deep breath, like I had to do calming breaths, because the ending, I don't want to give too much away, but the ending just, it left me up in arms. And then I went to the place where I always go whenever I have questions about books, whenever I'm like, did anyone else feel this way? I went to Reddit. And Reddit did such a great job of giving me some possible theories and insight into the ending that I was like, you know what? I love that. That symbolism, yes. That is brilliant, Paul Murray. So 5 out of 5 stars, even with the ending. The next book that I read was Once Upon a Broken Heart, and this was YA fantasy. I ended up giving this 2 out of 5 stars. I wanted to like this so much more than I actually did. In the beginning of the story, I saw a lot of potential. This follows our main character, Evangeline. Evangeline is in love with a boy named Luke, but Luke proposes to Evangeline's stepsister, Marisol, and they're set to get married. So in an attempt to get Luke back, Evangeline seeks out Jax. Jax is a fate. He is like in charge of love, and he has this cursed kiss. And Evangeline and Jax, they make a deal where Evangeline has to kiss 3 people in order to stop Marisol and Luke's wedding. And that sounds like a fine enough premise. It seemed very YA, but I like a good YA story every now and then. But then from there, the book just goes rogue. It just spirals. The world sort of makes sense, but it just seemed like the author was jumping from idea to idea to idea without fully fleshing it out. And Evangeline is just an idiot. I don't know how else to say it. There's no polite way to say it, but every single decision that she made, you're like, Evangeline, stop doing this. You are stupid. So she was very frustrating. I will say Jax was interesting. He was definitely the big appeal of the entire story. You want to know more about Jax? I just want like a Jax backstory. I didn't really need Evangeline or Marisol or any of the rest of them. So 2 stars, but mostly those 2 stars are for Jax. I'm not going to say I'm never going to read the rest of the series, but it's definitely not high on my list. And the last book that I read in February was an audiobook re-listen. This was The Outsider by Stephen King, and as I talked about earlier, this does have Holly Gibney in it. I actually read The Outsider when it first came out. I didn't even know about the Bill Hodges trilogy when I read The Outsider. I didn't know anything about Holly besides what I read about her in The Outsider. So I read them out of order, but it didn't really super matter. So this was a re-listen since I had finally finished Bill Hodges, since I had read Holly. I was like, why not go back to The Outsider? So this is an interesting story in conception in the beginning half of the book. As per usual with Stephen King's books, I do think that this could have been shorter than it actually was. This was a little bit over 500 pages, and I feel like he could have gotten his point across in like 350 to 400. So the beginning of the story is really interesting. Basically, a boy is very savagely and very brutally murdered, and you find out the way that he's murdered, and if you have a squeamish stomach, this may not be the book for you. And there's a bunch of witnesses that say that it was the town's baseball coach, Terry Maitland, that murdered him. Now, Terry Maitland is like your Ned Flanders stand-up type of guy. This happened in a small Oklahoma town, and everyone knows everyone, and everyone knows Terry as Coach T, just as like a really good dude. He volunteers to coach the baseball team. He's a high school teacher. He has a family of his own, including a wife and 2 daughters, and he just seems like a really good guy. So people are having trouble like stomaching that Terry Maitland's the one that they saw murder this kid. But at the same time, like, DNA doesn't lie, right? So once they realize like DNA is coming out, there's like multiple witnesses that they saw Terry do this, the town immediately turns on him. They're like, I don't care that we thought you were a good guy. You never know what happens behind closed doors type of deal. But Terry and his family are insistent that he didn't do this. Terry's like, I wasn't even in town when this happened. He was in Cap City going to go see Harlan Coben, the author. And he's like, I have all these people that can vouch for me. It's actually found out that Terry is seen on tape at this convention while he's allegedly murdering this kid. So the police don't know what to do because, again, like, DNA evidence doesn't lie. He had to have murdered this guy. So it goes through that. Eventually, Holly gets roped into helping solve what all went down there. And I will say the first half of the story I thought was really good, but it just dies off. It goes very Stephen King-esque, where it goes like supernatural, and it was kind of disappointing in the latter half. So I gave it 3 out of 5 stars just because I liked the beginning so much, but I will definitely say I think you will be disappointed by the latter half. So those are all of the books that I read in February. Leave me a comment down below. Let me know what were some of the best books that you read in February. Let me know if you've read any of the books that I read and if you agree or disagree. And if you guys did enjoy this video, please do make sure you give it a thumbs up and you hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching. Bye.